It is a reality, but it has not deterred any companies or investors or the actual regular flow of business, if you will. It's just like everything else, localized in certain areas that you just try not to go there and not to mess with the wrong people.
That's
But
right. Just like any place.
yeah, just in terms of business itself, it has not been an issue.
All right, welcome to our Industrial Advisors podcast. You have Bill Condon and Matt McGregor, and we have a great guest today, JJ Gallardo, who is Executive Vice President with Colliers in Client Solutions for Latin America. JJ has a lot of experience and has been working kind of that Latin America market. It's been kind of the quarterback for us as we go from the U.S., anything Latin America. So, JJ, thanks for joining us. It's great to finally have you on the show.
Thank you. Thank you. It's really a pleasure. I'm delighted to do this.
Great.
Yeah, thanks so much. JJ, maybe you kick us off in generalities with the relationship in Latin America with the United States. And I know and we're going to hit, I think, 11 countries here, and they're all going to be different. But maybe just give us a synopsis of the overview of how our relations, and maybe especially Mexico, but overall, how is the United States viewed right now, and what those relationships in Latin America look like?
Sure. Thank you very much. As you said, I've been doing this for a long time. I was born and raised in Mexico, so started my career down there, but then came to the U.S. originally in 1998. So it's been 26 years that I've been observing the relationship grow, particularly from the commercial real estate perspective. I had the opportunity to see the openings of with a competitor actually, but a number of offices across the region: Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, Chile, Peru, Colombia, Costa Rica, and then had an opportunity to watch Colliers as it was consolidating its presence. And now we have a presence in 10 countries across the region, the main countries being Mexico and Brazil, which concentrate a good chunk of the population. But then we also have a presence in Argentina, in Chile, in Peru, Colombia, Central America, and parts of the Caribbean. In general terms, Latin America is a complement of North America, both US and Canada. If you look at the whole continent, if you add the 370 million people that you have with the US and Canada, plus the 650 that Latin America has, you reach over 1 billion people, which is important in terms of labor, particularly now that we're competing with the blocks in Europe and in Asia. And in terms of natural resources, I think it's also important because Latin America and Caribbean represent about the size of continental US and Canada, with plenty of natural resources. So the alignment makes a lot of sense. Colliers used to have Latin America as an independent region, but to be honest with you, it's not yet as developed as in terms of the profession as in North America. So it made a lot of sense to realign us with the U.S. in order to have the same processes, the same perspectives, as just like we're doing with your client. It's a region that, if you want to think about it, would be more like a teenager, if you will, that you know that it's not yet there, but you already see that it's a tall teenager, a strong one, and it will in time become a very interesting force. And so that's the way we look at it. We only have 20 offices across the region, 1,300 people. If you think that we have 5,700 just in the US and hundreds of offices here, you can see what I'm saying. The way we look at it is as if it was a single country. It's more similar to the European Union or even the US, where you don't really say Mexico, but you say certain cities in Mexico. Same for Brazil. You really are saying Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro. When you say Santiago, Lima, Peru, you say Lima. When you say and so on. But we continue making inroads. It started as only transactional services. And it was just like in the rest of the world, a network of independent offices with a little vertical structure and accountability, which now we have realigned under a single umbrella. And it allows us to serve major clients now that it was not really feasible just say 10 years ago. So now in the region, for example, we're serving Nestle or SAP or Alcon or Ernst & Young or DHL, which really wasn't possible a few years ago. But now we have a service offering that is integral, complementary, and makes a lot of sense aligned with the U.S.
Well, let's start off with Mexico, and thank you very much for that outline. And maybe let's dive into the fundamentals of Mexico. Start with the relationship, if you don't mind, with the U.S., and then let's dive into what makes Mexico tick and how things are going there.
Yeah, well, so as I mentioned, I was born and raised in Mexico. The first 37 years of my life spent there. I'm a lawyer by training, had a master's in international business, ended up in real estate by chance. And because of my trajectory, I ended up doing international business. And of course, the first country that was the trigger, not only for Colliers, but really for our competitors as well, was Mexico because of the North American Free Trade Agreement, which was signed 30 years ago this year, 1994. And at the time, it was a very different world. The USSR had collapsed. China had not even started coming up. It was really a unipolar world. And Mexico at the time had mixed feelings towards the U.S. Because of history. But we knew that we needed the U.S. and the alignment. That we had a president that once said, poor Mexico, so far from God and so close to the United States. But in reality, it's not really a curse. It's a blessing. No? And these 30 years have proven it. So Mexico is a country about 1/4 that of the United States, with 130 million people population. Of all levels, but because of location, you have a lot of people educated in the U.S. or at least bilingual. And the movies, the TV shows, etc., the processes are very much aligned with the U.S. About 83% of the tourism that goes down there in the millions is from the U.S., so there's a familiarity with it. And this is for all of Latin America, but very particularly for Mexico. About 85% of the corporations that we assist across the region are from the United States. So that allows for a perfect alignment, if you will. And the processes now, the way that things are done, the way even that rents are collected or the standards for construction follow those of the United States. Mexico is at a different stage, if you will, maybe say 40, 50 years behind. But it's rapidly advancing, and part of it is thanks precisely to these free trade agreements, first the NAFTA and now the USMCA.
So tell us a little bit about onshoring and the impact. What's going on in Mexico? In the United States, we're just hearing that everything's moving to Mexico. What's really happening?
Again, this North American Free Trade Agreement was put in place 30 years ago precisely to foment the difference between salaries in the U.S. and Mexico is super substantial. It's 1/8. And then the restrictions, environmental restrictions of the U.S. are not as stringent in Mexico. So many industries that needed either a more affordable labor or less stringent environmental concerns was going down there for years. But what happens is that since the former administration here in the U.S., the Trump tariffs started separating or decoupling from China, and then added to that, we got the pandemic and the supply chain bottlenecks. And so we came to realize that it was needed to bring the industries closer to home. So that was the reshoring, but reshoring to the United States. But then again, as I said, there were certain industries that needed a cheaper labor and other parameters in environmental. So those went to Mexico. And then you have raw material friendshoring because of what's happening in Europe, Middle East, and Africa. You need to bring it close, and so it's a realignment of the Americas, if you will, with the first beneficiary in Mexico.
Excellent. And just touch on this briefly, but in the United States, everybody gets a little scared of the cartel. What's the real situation? How much does the U.S. media blow that out of proportion?
Well, my grandmother used to tell me, don't go to the United States because they kill people there. The media that we
Well
see in
said.
Mexico is people getting shot in Chicago, in Detroit, in
That's right.
etc. And sounds like a very scary thing. It is a reality, but it has not deterred any companies or investors or the actual regular flow of business, if you will. It's just like everything else, localized in certain areas that you just try not to go there and not to mess with the wrong people.
That's right. Just like any place.
Yeah. Just in terms of business itself, it has not been an issue.
Excellent.
Let's talk about Brazil. What are some of the emerging markets for industrial in Brazil? We've done some deals there, so I'm curious on what's some of the emerging markets are there.
So Brazil is another interesting country. It's you remember all of Latin America was really two countries, Spain and Portugal. So Brazil was Portugal. It's about the size of continental US, 220 million people, a GDP which is just as large as France or larger than Italy. So it's in itself a very interesting market just because of the pure number of people. But then again, in terms of natural resources, it's super rich, iron ore, oil, gas, poultry, you name it, soy, etc., etc. So the country was originally developed in the southeast because that's where the Portugal Empire brought their capital from Europe originally into Rio de Janeiro and the neighboring state of Sao Paulo. But really, if you count those, you have 60 million people. Out of 220 million people, you have plenty of space and people to develop. So you have a certain new poles of development on the northeast, closer to Europe, if you will, and to the United States on the East Coast. Then you have agribusiness is huge, as you may imagine. So the center of the country and the southwest is gigantic. And even the Amazon River, originally Henry Ford created a city right in the middle of the Amazon for rubber, for the tires, and that stayed there. And they realized that it was a communication similar to what you would find in the Great Lakes here in the United States. And so they have specific incentives there that have attracted companies from all over the world to do manufacturing.
Interesting. I was unaware of that. That's fascinating.
Manaus, no? So you have Manaus in the Amazons, you have Recife on the Pacific, and then you have even the south where the floodings just happened, Belo Horizonte, for example. You have plenty of poles to develop.
Yeah, talk to us about Argentina and the health of the industrial sector there.
Sure. So Argentina is the third largest country in the region, actually the second for Latin America after Brazil, but it's got a smaller population than Mexico. So it's a very rich country as well. Plenty of natural resources. You've heard of meat and oil, etc., but lithium, they are very rich in lithium, for example.
Interesting.
The new gold. And they were the main producers of grain during a couple of world wars. So it's a rich country that has ups and downs. Right now it's on the downside, but we know that it's going to be coming back. What's interesting about Argentina is the new president, Milei, who aligned entirely to the right and realigned towards the United States. So he's exiting the BRICS proposition. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa were going to welcome Argentina as an additional member. He said, no deals with them, and I'm aligning with whomever wins in the United States. So the currency is getting more stable, inflation is going down, but they are coming from a weak position. So it's a great timing to go look into opportunities in Argentina. They have highly qualified people. They have plenty of natural resources, great location. And it's an opportunity for our clients and for investors and developers.
Excellent. And what role does Chile play in the economy of
So Chile
Latin America?
and Peru both rely a lot on mining, mostly copper. Chile is, as you remember, it's like a Chile, very long, very narrow, concentrated mostly in the capital, Santiago, relying mostly on mining, copper, and their internal industry. They do have fish, you remember the salmon and the berries and the wines, but it's really the copper driving the economy. So when the price go down, their economy go down.
Right.
It was perceived as a very stable one, but then again, because of the spread, there was some social unrest that is cooling down, but they went through an impasse and coming out of it as we speak.
How's their political health, both Peru as well as Chile?
Well, Peru is a pointing case because they have 5 former presidents in jail, which is unacceptable. And one of them committed suicide. So it's just like, this is
My
crazy.
gosh, that is
But
crazy.
believe it or not, the economy is very stable and it has one of the healthier growth rates in all of the region. And although it has a relatively small population, somewhere around 30 million people, again, it's really rich. And one of the drivers is actually China. China invested $3.5 billion in a new port called Shanghai, which resembles Shanghai, to connect Shanghai with Shanghai. And so it's going to be the exit and entrance of goods going to Asia. That's the driver other than the mining.
How about Colombia? How deep is that industrial market?
So again, Colombia has relied also on natural resources, mostly more than industrial, and their internal market. So although it's a country slightly smaller than Mexico, it has 50 million people, so it has a healthy population, well educated. It has access to both oceans, the Atlantic and the Pacific. And in terms of industry, it's not an industrial hub, if you will. It is a logistics interesting hub, and they have tried a lot. They have created free trade zones. They have incentives of all sorts. But so far, it's a different kind of industry that is going there. For example, BPOs, because of the education of the people. So not so much manufacturing, although they do have, but for their internal consumption, but other kinds of services. And their location is really exceptional.
Let's talk about Panama for a second. Obviously, outside of nearshoring of Mexico and the size of Brazil and natural resources, I would say in Latin America, the Panama Canal probably has the biggest influence on transportation for the United States. And there's been a problem there, right? So can you give us an update on Panama and how that canal is working?
The canal right now is suffering because of the drought. Not as many ships can go across. So ships are waiting even for 20 days, which makes it ridiculously expensive and profitable.
Yes.
So it's not being efficient. So you can correct many things, but a drought, that's going to be a difficult one. So Mexico is taking advantage of that, and they created a dry canal, interoceanic. It's only 190 miles in the narrower part of the country. And the difference of what Mexico is doing is that they are establishing industrial parks at both ends to add value to the product that is crossing. The Panama Canal has been a blessing in terms of just the fees for crossing, but because they don't add any value in terms of manufacturing, it doesn't create that many jobs or as much wealth as you would have hoped for, which is a problem and an opportunity because they are thinking, okay, let's do something. So there was a military base at the entrance coming from the Pacific, the Howard base, US base that was, the keys were given back. And that was reconverted into a office and industrial hub with a specific incentives. And that's working quite nicely. We have some major clients established there. They should be replicating that way more. It's only about 6 million people, so it's not huge, but location and the canal make a difference.
Maybe just define what a dry canal means to the listener.
So instead of going by ship, you have a port on the Pacific in Mexico, in Salina Cruz in Oaxaca, and then it crosses via a train and lands on the other side, which is only a few hours instead of 20 days, and it's really inexpensive. You add some light manufacturing, so you can claim it comes from Mexico and take advantage of the 15 free trade agreements that Mexico has with almost 50 countries. So
Wow.
that's a real win.
How about Costa Rica and any maybe growth opportunities you see in the Costa Rica market?
So Costa Rica, we all heard it's a gorgeous country, lavish vegetation, etc. Relatively small population, under 4 million people, well-educated people. Companies like Intel realized this years ago, and they brought manufacturing, but high-tech manufacturing. So you do see their medical devices, pharmaceutical, or high-tech manufacturing. You wouldn't see, for example, automotive or other thing more pollutant, because they do have very stringent environmental regulations there.
Imagine that, because it is a beautiful country and they probably want to keep it that way for sure. Moving to El Salvador, tell us about the challenges and opportunities from an industrial perspective in El Salvador.
Well, El Salvador is coming from a very difficult period. They have this new president that got very tough on gangs and put them all in jail. I was there for the opening of our office a few months ago, and I was pleasantly surprised, to be honest with you. But reality, they have about 7 million people. They are adjacent to Guatemala. The infrastructure is not yet there. There are some players like Haynes, for example, that has manufacturing facilities there, because Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua are really what Mexico is for the United States. So less developed, less expensive place where you can have facilities that require cheap labor.
In Guatemala, what's the state of the market there?
So Guatemala City, you would be very surprised. It's gorgeous. Just like every other Latin American country, resembling what the Spaniards used to do, is highly concentrated, everything in the capital, and the rest of the country is less developed. So they have 17 million people strong, and that's good. They have a strong market. They have agribusiness, but they don't really have ports or expertise or etc. So they are looking at Mexico as the big brother. And this dry canal that I mentioned now connects with Guatemala via train. And the intent is to add the south of Mexico, which is about 35 million people, to the 40, 50 million people that Central America has, and create a super hub of manufacturing that would benefit really the entire continent.
It's fascinating, and it just there's so much involvement with Mexico. It's amazing what's going on in Mexico overall.
Yeah, well, the language barrier, of course, is always a problem. For example, for Central America to do business with the U.S., whereas
Sure,
Mexico has way more similarities, and the language barrier is not there. So
the last one on our list is the Dominican Republic, which I would say for the most part is known for tourism. I think Dominican Republic is also known to be kind of divided in half. Tell us a little bit about the tourism, how industrial plays into that, and what's going on there.
I was just there for my 35th wedding anniversary. Took a cruise and stopped in Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico. And Dominican Republic, to your point, was the original island where the Spaniards established. It was called La Española, and it was a single island. But then it was split between the French and the Spanish. And so the French part is Haiti, which was the first country to get independence in all of Latin America, actually in all of the Americas from the French, and Dominican Republic, which then got its independence from. So it's about 11 million people, very famous because of Punta Cana and Cap Cana. To your point, they just reached the 10 million people, tourists, people going down there, which is very substantial. And just that generates a lot of needs in terms of logistics just to feed them, plus the population, etc. On top of that, they are conscious that they need to also develop some additional industry. So try to replicate what Puerto Rico had, for example, with pharmaceuticals, because they don't have the restrictions of the Jones Act in terms of all the ships just being able to come from the United States. So they can be sourced from all over the world, and they have 5 times the population or 3 times the population of Puerto Rico. So they are in an interesting place.
Very insightful. Well, to wrap it up, over the next, say, 10, 15, 20 years, where do you think the top growth markets are in Latin America?
The south of Mexico and Central America, keep an eye on that, because that is going to be surprising. For sure, Colombia is a very mature market. Argentina is going to make a big comeback, and I'm going to be very happy for them. And Brazil has so much to develop on the northeast and the center of the country. So just right there, there's plenty of opportunities, as I said, for clients, for us, for everybody, and for their people.
Yeah. Well, it's been a very insightful podcast here. Thanks for sharing your knowledge as always, JJ. You're as good as it gets in that market, and a great partner of ours. So appreciate you coming on and spending the time with us and sharing that wisdom.
Thank you, JJ.
Thank you for the opportunity.
You bet. Great job. Thank you.
Thank you.